Welcome to another round of our Foundy webinars. Thanks for joining. I see we have quite a few folks already joined here. Sorry, we're a couple minutes late. We're experiencing a couple little technical difficulties, but one of our guests will be joining back in here in just a moment. In the meantime, while we kind of give everybody a few more minutes to get into the call, if you want to drop your name and maybe where you're dialing in from, whether you're here in the States or somewhere else throughout the world. It's always nice to see where folks are tuning in from. There's Daniel.
All right. That's a good sign. Hey.
Melissa in Amsterdam. Hello, Melissa. Zane.
Melissa Amsterdam. Is that our friend Melissa?
I think that's that might be Melissa. I'm guessing it might be Melissa at Fuga, but for those that don't know, my name's Taylor Winchester. I'm the Director of Revenue here at Foundy. I'm just going to be kind of playing moderator / host today, and I'll introduce here in just a moment. We have I'll let them give their own formal introductions, but I have Jason Hobbs here. He's the president and founder here at Foundy. And then we have Daniel Prescott, who is the vice president of business and legal affairs for Center Drive Media and Levity Live. And I'll let them tell a little bit more about their experience here in a moment. It's nice to see a lot of recognized names here of folks that I know I've met and chatted with. It looks like we lost Daniel again.
Yeah, maybe he can go off camera this time around. I think he might be having some struggles with the internet out there. He'll be back.
Some Stefan from Austria, Dorothy up in Montreal, Phil in London. We got some good representation across the world. Tino in the UK.
It's good to have a global, I think, audience for this because, of course, this is a global issue to deal with. Well, should we jump in while we wait for Daniel to come back, anyways?
Yeah, I think it's okay to go ahead and get started. We are recording this, so we'll have if anybody joins us late, we'll be able to share this recording with them after the fact. So yeah, feel free to go ahead and kick us off here, Jason.
All right. And to those of you flying on planes from London to Stockholm, I hope the internet stays strong, unlike it is down here, unfortunately. So we're just going to take you through a bit of an overview, state of the internet, where we're at currently. Obviously there's been a lot of changes, I think, this year, the last few years, but this year in particular with CPRA, with Google Analytics Universal phasing out and GA4 taking over, all of that officially. I think a lot of folks, especially if you're tuning in from around the world, has dealt with GDPR since, what is it, like 2018 or something? Or maybe you got started a little bit earlier on that sort of thing. And, sorry, I see Daniel maybe coming back on. No, that's Aaron saying the video. If our internet, if the connection is bad, we may just go off camera for you all, FYI. Looks like some other folks might be having some issues in the chat with video. Some people are doing well. But I guess just from the top, we do have to say this is informational purposes only, does not constitute legal advice. Definitely encourage you to consult with a legal professional if you have your own lawyer, your own legal team, etc. I am hoping that some of this will give you a little bit of a framework to maybe ask some of the questions that have not yet come up with your legal team, or ask some questions, with your legal team, just to dig a little deeper into some of these things, because they are still pretty new. And in my experience of dealing with a lot of different legal teams, internal and external, is that people are still trying to figure out what all of it means. And what it means, I think, in my side of the world, which is the marketing side of the music space. Sometimes lawyers will say, it'd be easy as if we just block all data tracking software, if we block all cookies, if we don't install any pixels, etc. And I tend to have to advocate on behalf of everyone who needs to run a remarketing campaign or track a ticket sale to the origin of the ad campaign or something like that. It would all be easier, of course, if we didn't have to do any of those things, but we do. And so hopefully those give you some information to be able to go and have that conversation with your legal team. Daniel will probably say the same thing because he didn't hear me say it, as Daniel is a lawyer, but he also will not be giving legal advice, but he will talk about some of the experiences he's had recently with dealing with these things. So just continue. As many of you have probably seen, we're seeing browsers that are now blocking cookies. Now, primarily what you're going to see immediately is browsers, operating systems, mobile devices, etc., actually blocking third-party cookies for starters. Really the difference between a third-party and a first-party cookie is the first-party cookie is being created by the website that you're visiting. So I'm going to use some references to our own platform. Found.ee has its own pixel. We call it a universal pixel. We call it a universal pixel because it does a lot of different things. And I'll walk you through a couple of those things. But that pixel fires it downloads a cookie onto the computer of the fan or the browser of the fan or consumer that's engaging a Found.ee page, a Found.ee link, a Found.ee email capture, a Found.ee banner ad, etc. Because our website is actually creating that, and the experience is happening from there, that is a first-party pixel. Now, the difference would be if you took a Facebook pixel and you installed it on Found.ee into the Manage Pixel section. We're not creating the Facebook pixel. Our website is not creating it. All browsers, all operating systems, all cookie blockers, et cetera, they're going to automatically see those as third-party pixels. And so the same thing is also true on your own website. So even though you have full capacity and you can verify with Facebook, you can verify with Google, you can verify with anybody else, when you put when you put their pixels on your website to build a remarketing audience, or even to track a conversion, those are considered third-party pixels. And that would be the same case with our pixel as well. If you put our pixel on your website, because it's your website and it's our pixel, that is a third-party pixel. And so you're going to see a lot of broken data, unfortunately. That's just where things are at. And that's going to continue to get worse this year, unless there are some anti-competition lawsuits brought to Google and the handful of companies that are sort of initiating and pushing this charge through. I think it's, I'm actually just going to Google who it is, but the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, aka the CMA, has ordered Google pause its plans to phase out third-party cookies. The CMA cited competition concerns as the reason for the pause. This is something that we've thought for a long time could and, well, frankly, should happen. Because these massive companies that have initiated, through this altruistic guise that they're trying to save people's private data, et cetera. They're also the same companies that have all the data points that they need to be able to run a very targeted ad and track basically all of your engagements across the internet, essentially. Hey, Daniel, welcome back. If you start to freeze out, feel free to just go off camera. It might help a little bit.
Yeah, such an embarrassment. Apologies. I don't know what was going on with my internet.
Don't you worry. We're still going down the outline anyway, so we're moving ahead. We're in the phase where we're talking about the competition or the anti-competition that the UK has stated as a reason for enforcing Google's stop phasing out their third-party cookies. Anyways, I'm actually hopeful that third-party cookies won't be phased out. I like the idea of having more competition out there. You're not going to be, 4 or 5 gatekeepers like it was in the 90s, essentially, that had all the data. Right now, there are a lot of different companies, including our own. We're a small advertising, marketing, data management platform. We bring value to the table, and just like a lot of other small companies do, Distillery and I can't think of the other ones off the top of my head, but Distillery and other ones, there are values. There's valuable and unique data they're able to bring to the table. And if Google and Facebook and a lot of them are able to fully phase out third-party pixels and cookies, then they're going to they're just going to make it to where we all have to just access data through them, essentially. So I'm hoping that's not going to be the case. But as I mentioned, when you with a found.ee page and a found.ee pixel, the pixel cookie, the page, that all becomes first-party data, essentially. But when you install our pixel on your website, it becomes third-party data. So there's going to be some fog of war when it comes to being able to see the entire data landscape. But it won't. We're all working to basically try and make sure that we can mitigate some of those gaps. So one of the things I mentioned that might be a surprise to some of you, maybe not to those of you who are doing this already. Those of you on the recorded music side, you're probably not tracking a heck of a lot of conversions, people driving over to a streaming platform and being able to track the actual linear conversion anyways. But those of you that are selling shirts on Shopify or tickets with Ticketmaster or eTix or anybody else, you'll notice that conversion tracking may not be working as well as it once did. And that's for the same reason. You install a Facebook pixel, you install a found.ee pixel, you install any of our third-party pixels, and unfortunately, the browsers that the fans are using may be blocking those pixels from firing to begin with because they are third-party pixels. So a lot of us, Facebook, Google, and us, found.ee as well, we've introduced technology called fingerprinting technology. Fingerprinting technology, it works differently than a cookie. Essentially, rather than storing a file on a browser, we're trying to understand if an engagement that takes place here and an engagement that takes place here are the same person. Effectively, are they the same person? Is it the same person that clicked on the ad or clicked on the link and then went through the conversion itself? So Facebook has done this. Google's done this. Found.ee has done this. A lot of different companies have introduced fingerprint technology. They might call it something else, cookieless technology or whatever else. It's effectively fingerprinting technology. A lot of us have had to introduce this so that we can track additional conversion data. The good news is it can work incredibly well because even though we have these, we have browsers and operating systems and stuff and plugins that are blocking third-party cookies now, they've been blocking them for a while. There have been a lot of plugins and browser settings that have been blocking cookies for a long time. And so fingerprinting technology has actually been around for quite a while to help mitigate those issues, essentially with data transparency or data visibility. And they actually do really well. So that's good news. And
Jason, how explicit is your privacy policy when it goes into considerations, and when you're talking about the fingerprinting technology? Are you guys pretty clear about the consents that you need from potential consumers?
Yeah, and I guess that dovetails perfectly into best practices for capturing data as well. Someone's looking at the outline, I think. So I guess we'll talk more about best practices and we will about the explicit legal requirements. We will talk somewhat about what is published in terms of legal requirements and stuff like that. But again, not as legal advice, just informational purposes only. So our privacy policy, for instance, and we actually manage hundreds of additional domains, data capturing sort of ecosystems, we call them. The privacy policies are incredibly explicit. You have to actually list, or we have to, our lawyers have advised us that we have to list the type of data that we're capturing, everything from IP addresses to email addresses to delivering pixels triggering pixels and delivering cookies and that sort of thing. You have to be explicit in that, and you have to make sure that your privacy policies are meeting the current requirements of GDPR, CCPA, CPRA, and all of the other privacy policy requirements and data requirements around the world. Those ones tend to be the three that people use as a sort of catch-all. They tend, a lot of legal teams tend to think that if you're covering GDPR and you're covering California, the majority of the rest of the world who do have differences, even state by state, different states have different data regulations and privacy regulations. A lot of people default to California's and GDPR's, and they say, well, that should cover us. Whether or not your teams agree that they do, that would be up to you and your team. And so you should definitely have those conversations. But yeah, every territory needs to have privacy policy that's going to cover it for that territory. In our case, we use a California version, a GDPR version, and a standard version, essentially, a sort of everyone else version. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's actually an interesting question, Daniel. From my experience, we tend to have to when we're supporting clients with their data capturing. We tend to focus on California and EU, and I can't remember all the countries that fall under GDPR. It's more than just the EU. Are you dealing with other complicated territorial privacy landscapes as well?
No, I think you phrased it well. For the most part, typically rely on the GDPR, the CCPA, and the CPRA. But then as it relates to each client's specific need, when you start really looking at their business and assessing what points of contact they have with potentially other states, then you have to go into really state-specific analysis.
Yeah.
My initial step when I'm sort of reviewing the privacy policy or building one from scratch for a company, I typically ask them questions about points of contact, what states they're interfacing with, whether or not if they have EU residents or anyone in the European areas that they might be having contact with, or they're monitoring some of the individuals' activity from those areas. But you're right, for the most part, I think the GDPR is pretty expensive, and so is the CCPA. But yeah, sometimes it gets into really a state-specific analysis, and it really just depends on the business.
Yeah, for real. And I guess I should say, to take this back a step, Daniel actually helped us a long time ago with our GDPR and CCPA policy requirements. We've since had updates now that we're within the downtown ecosystem. The downtown attorneys and third-party attorneys have all helped out as well with continuing to help us evolve those things and make sure that we're covering all the bases. Daniel's continued to work with, I think, third-party companies, including one of our big competitors as well, with helping them get make sure that their bases are covered with the new CPRA. But Daniel, you've even worked with companies that have had to do like data transfers from specifically from South Korea, which has a pretty onerous privacy policy and privacy regulations, right?
Yeah, that was a different and unique situation, and it really had something to do with a documentary film. So it's sort of spanning across really just the normal look that you would see when you're dealing with consumer-based product. And when dealing with South Korea, it was very interesting, because as you start to just collect physical items for the release of, let's say, a documentary, they're considering that also private data, and
Yeah.
pictures and photographs. And I think as we start seeing the integration of AI, and not to get into that or get too granular with that, but as we see the integration with that, I can see how it's going to affect some of these rules and regulations. And the GDPR tends to be very expansive because they're trying to protect the consumer.
Yeah.
And expanding those definitions as you go to different countries, it's going to get rather complicated.
Yeah, and I know that you your clients and you might actually deal with an array of different industries. Most of the people on this call will be music industry, but I guess that is to say, well, I guess to kind of bring it back to two things. So we're talking a little bit about territorial or geo-specific privacy regulations and requirements and laws. When we go and support some of our clients that we've supported on some of this data ecosystem, data collection, data management stuff, we've had to implement technologies that can actually understand where people are coming from and deliver different experiences based on where they're coming from. So some states, just for everyone on the call, some countries, some states, they require explicit consent only on a majority of the types of pixels and cookies that may be fired and downloaded. Some require implicit consent. And what that means to you and your team might be different to us, to some of our clients. What that's meant is somebody being notified properly and continuing to use the website, whether or not they've clicked accept. That has been considered implicit consent in some territories, for instance. Some people will withhold certain types of tracking pixels and cookies and then deliver other types of tracking pixels and cookies until there's an explicit consent. That's really important to deal with. And then finding tools that can help you deliver a privacy policy that matches and a cookie and pixel and tracking experience that matches the territory is important. There are a lot of them out there nowadays. One that we use a lot is called Cookie Pro. And so if anybody is looking into which technologies to try and find that might match your needs, Cookie Pro is one that we use. We've also worked with people that work with Cookie Yes, I believe. I don't know the pricing on either of them off the top of my head. I don't think that they're terrible if you're talking about one or two websites. If you're talking about like 100 websites, they can be pretty expensive pretty quickly. But they will allow you to set up geo rules, different privacy policies being presented, different options to the user, because California, again, has different options than Milwaukee. I don't know that to be true, but California might have some of the most stringent rules, for instance, in terms of data collection. We have CCPA, and we have a sort of a addendum, I guess, with CPRA as well, which provides additional rights, which if you have done all of your due diligence on CCPA and have not yet looked into CPRA, you definitely should, because that is now the law of the land. And I would say it's more of an addendum from my experience than it is. It's not like a complete overhaul. It's just, there are some things that have absolutely changed and some things that are basically what they were previously. But yeah, a lot of people also, I was working with one company, an agency that manages some large talent. And the agency itself was pretty small. And so when they were looking into whether or not CCPA applied to them, initially they're like, well, we don't make $25 million. And so if you guys want to go look this up, by the way, there are certain requirements to find out if CCPA applies to your business. Maybe you're not making $25 million and you think that, well, then it shouldn't apply to me, et cetera. And there's a handful of other things as well. For instance, how much revenue you derive from California versus other states. But here's the one that seems to get everyone in the music industry, as long as you represent any artist of any of a pretty standard significant size, I would say. At least previously, the rule was if you buy, sell, or receive personal information of 50,000 or more California residents, households, or devices. And a lot of your artists probably have 50,000 or more email addresses, SMS captures, even just IP addresses. IP addresses are considered part of what is considered PII, personally identifiable information. And how do you get those? Well, you get those through all sorts of different analytics systems. Even just your server, if you're AWS or Mixpanel or something else, might be tracking and storing IP addresses. And so if you were doing that and it's 50,000 or more, this is the rule a couple of years ago, at least it might have changed higher or lower. So I definitely encourage you to look it up. But the reason why CCPA and CPRA has been determined to apply to a lot of our clients is not because they're making $25 million a year. It is because they have 50,000 emails, phone numbers, or IP addresses being stored. And
or even browsing history too, Jason. That's
yep.
also.
Yep, exactly. And just so you know, also the fingerprinting technologies, a lot of them will use IP addresses as part of how they can determine a fingerprint, essentially. And so they can help, to help you track fan data engagements and conversions. So likely to get more IPs as people are moving from cookies into fingerprinting as well. So these are just things to be looking for. And everything that we think of is automatically necessarily is intuitive to us that it might be PII. When I first started going down this path for GDPR years ago and TCPA years ago, I was surprised to find out that IP addresses were considered PII initially. There are a handful of other things that recently surprised me as well, and I can't recall them off the top of my head. But this is why we have to consult legal teams constantly as well. There are new cases, there are new rulings, and there are updates to these definitions constantly. So definitely look for those current rules and talk to your legal team about that. Excuse me. And then I think a lot of people might be starting to see the do not sell button appear, or do not sell link appear on websites in California. Do not sell is interesting. So some browsers and some plugins are automatically recognizing if somebody has enabled a do not sell beacon, essentially, we'll just call it a beacon for now. And some websites also recognize if those beacons have been turned on, and they say, do not sell my data. And so certain protocols would then happen with that website. So that website, for instance, may not track your data at all, or maybe they're not selling your data to the highest bidder anymore, or something like that. This is something that is not necessarily a universal standard as of yet. Not all browsers are enabled to deliver or this signal to a website, and not all websites are listening for it, essentially, as of yet. But if you're selling data, you need to have this. Now, some of you might have tuned out because most of you are not considering yourselves as selling data. Unfortunately, if you've installed Google Analytics and you talk to your legal team, they may tell you that based on the law, based on the definition of selling data, you are actually selling data. I can't remember the exact phrasing, but this is something for you to have to bring up with your privacy team, with your legal team. This was something that was required big changes with a lot of our clients based on their legal counsel, and that was if you are trading data in kind for a business value, a valuable business deliverable, essentially. So in this case, they said Google Analytics, you've installed that code, you are sending data to Google servers. In exchange, they're delivering to you valuable insights. They considered that selling data. Now, that might also be the case with all kinds of different things that you've installed, from Spotify Connect to Facebook marketing pixels to et cetera, et cetera. I definitely encourage you to look into that as well. I think you probably find, just go back to your counsel and have a long conversation about all the different tools that you've installed across your artist websites, essentially, at this point, because a lot of those may be considered as you selling data, unfortunately. Excuse me. Yeah, I guess that's the majority of my outline. All right. Daniel, one of the things I was going to ask you about, though, excuse me, was whether or not, well, I guess when you go into a room and you have a conversation about data in general, data collection, data, et cetera, you're coming into those rooms as essentially, right? So you're not necessarily thinking about what does this person need for remarketing purposes or advertising conversion purposes, or how do you tend to approach those things? And
Yeah, good question. Typically I'm approaching it from the perspective of, is the privacy policy that's in place strong enough to help them mitigate any exposure? So I'm looking at it strictly from that perspective. Now, as the customer really goes in and the client says, hey, I want you to really fine tune my privacy policy because I'm trying to get away with these particular things, I will sort of lead them in a direction where I think it's clear enough to say that, hey, what you're doing is explicit. Maybe it's the way in which you describe it in your privacy policy about the consent that you're going to be receiving when you're dealing with these third-party cookie tracking and collecting companies. But my goal is to, number one, try to mitigate any exposure for the client. And doing that really is to essentially just inform them of the different rules and regulations. And sometimes it may be a situation in which they think they may have effective safety measures in place, but as you start looking at sort of the defined terms and their terms and conditions, those safety measures aren't really clear, and they have to be clear for the consumer. So
and
it's
the
really,
penalty is quite high, right? Even for a small company.
yeah, the penalty for a small company can be high, and it just depends on whether or not you're looking at a violation that is a CCPA violation, or if you're looking at a violation that's going to affect the GDPR. So they want to be I basically tell the client that you want to be mindful of these potential penalties and avoid any instance where there's ambiguity in your privacy policy. And as a customer or a consumer says, hey, I feel as if you're collecting my personal information, I want to opt out of having any personal information being collected thus far. For example, like you started mentioning the CPRA, and the CPRA really works as an enhancement to the CCPA, and they've sort of emboldened the consumer by saying, hey, if there's an instance in which the information that's being collected is inaccurate, that has to be corrected. And then they've also sort of expanded the definition of personal information to include the definition of sensitive personal information. So
that's an interesting one. And I think depending on who's on the call, if they're a marketer or an HR person, that they're probably thinking about those completely differently. One of the things that we've talked to some of our clients about is just not collecting additional data that you don't really need or use. Do you really need to know their gender in all cases? Do you really need to know their age in all cases? A lot of times all you really need to know is, are they showing a propensity to buy a ticket? Are they a streamer on Spotify or Apple? Will they buy a vinyl? I would say even like 9 websites out of 10 that are selling t-shirts don't have a heck of a lot of differences between what they call a male t-shirt or a female t-shirt. So in terms of like collecting data and gender specific data or age specific data, I don't think people use it often enough to even start to. Some people might, but maybe also think about that. Like, if you're not actually using it, do you really need to collect that data? Sometimes it's just a novelty, I think, to have. People like to see it in like the Spotify insights, but how do they use it? Not often, And Taylor might even have Taylor nodded in agreement, so maybe he's also thinking the same thing as an advertiser. Like, do you see a lot of clients advertising, targeting people based on gender, or especially doing it effectively?
No, not really. And I think I think as a marketer, sometimes it's nice to want to collect that data, and we've lived in a world for so long to where it was okay to be able to collect that data without any real concerns,
Yeah.
from a privacy perspective or from like a legal perspective, I guess. But yeah, I think especially in the industry of music, I think it tends to be more the case that we're, as marketers, we're wearing so many hats and executing so many different campaigns on different projects that a lot of times we don't really have the capacity or time to really dig into the data to that granularity of a perspective and really do anything with it. So, you know, I think sometimes it maybe is smarter to just collect what you need in terms of tracking those conversions and building the remarketing audiences at a little bit wider of a net, and trusting that process of continued outreach is going to drive them down that fan journey or conversion funnel.
You know, even Facebook, I want to say like 8 years ago when you had a call with one of their Facebook advertising reps, they would say, let's get incredibly specific. Let's, target, let's refine your targeting a million different ways. And now you get on a call with them and they're like, don't do any of that. Let the system do it for you. Most of our systems, and ours included, Facebook's, Google's, et cetera, they're quite good at understanding from a larger pool who shows a higher propensity to engage, who's showing a higher propensity to convert, et cetera. And it really doesn't have much to do with what we would consider PII. It's now what the government considers PII, sure. But we don't need to get into sensitive data in order to understand who might buy a ticket to this concert. If it's a Sylvan Esso show, who's going to probably buy a ticket? Someone who's a fan of Sylvan Esso, who has previously shown an intent to buy, or maybe has even been there. People that have clicked on ticketing links, people that have been to the tour page, people that have searched for Sylvan Esso concerts recently. People have been to a found.ee page, found.ee Sylvan Esso page that has tour dates on it. Like that's way more valuable, I think, than targeting people based on age and gender and sensitive data and that sort of thing.
And then Jason, I think another important thing to mention is, typically when we're assessing these businesses, the question of how long you retain the data is also important. I don't know how that affects the music industry and if they need to retain that data longer than necessary if they're going back to fans and trying to remarket to them. But is there certain data that has been collected that doesn't necessarily need to be, retained? And so that's a good thing to sort of think about.
Yeah. And also, it used to be like remarketing audiences and stuff like that. People would store them for 580 days. Is that like a year and a half or something like that? And now most remarketing audiences don't really live beyond 3 to 6 months at all. So in terms of storing data, I think a lot of people are moving towards more recent data, not collection from all time. Even if you go back through your newsletter database and you look for, I think I just saw Glenn said that he booked Sylvan Esso's first show. The first round of ticket buyers, those emails might bounce today, if they're from 12 years ago or whatever that is. Now, some of those actually might be lifers. And I've seen some of those lifers be very valuable in holding on to those kinds of things. But I think the point remains, typically more recent data shows where that sort of value sort of bubbles to the surface, essentially. You might have 10 million people in an audience, but only 40,000 or 400,000 are going to actually actively engage something or consider purchasing something. So you don't necessarily need to hold on to all data forever. And maybe that's even better in terms of privacy adherence, for CCPA and GDPR and everything else. And speaking of, I think you said this too, Daniel, but people have the right to purge data. So you definitely have to make sure that you have people that are ensuring that if somebody requests the right to purge their data from your list, you are following through with that. Just so you know, for anybody on here, and I think the majority are found.ee users, there are automated systems for people to purge their data from found.ee. So in our, I think it's the manage privacy policy or something at the bottom of a page, you'll see it next time you look at a pre-save page at the very bottom. Clicking on that will allow a user to actually click a button and have Foundy automatically remove any cookies on their browser right then and there. And then we also remove that data from our servers. And then if somebody has an account and they have an email, they can verify all that data, then we're also going to actively purge any of the rest of that data for them as well. Same thing is true with a data request. We also have data requests that are automated. So thankfully, if somebody asks you to remove their Foundy data, you can just send them to this page and they can click on the button. They can go through the process on their own, essentially. But that doesn't mean if you've connected your Foundy email to MailChimp. So for those of you who are using the email capturing, you can connect that and send all the new emails over to your MailChimp. You would have to go through and remove that from MailChimp yourself. Just FYI, if somebody's asking to remove like an email address that you've collected. And I guess these are pretty important things to think about too, because you have the ability on Foundy, for instance, to capture SMS, to capture emails when you are getting a pre-save. And we're asking those questions on your behalf. We're asking for permission to collect an email. But then you are storing them. Once they have said yes, ultimately, you have those emails in your account. And so, well, first of all, if you haven't looked at those in a while, I definitely encourage you to go to your My Fans page and see how many emails you captured. Somebody recently asked us where that was, and turned out they had like 23,000 emails captured. And they're like, what? I could have been sending people emails? Like, yes, you can. Go download those. But yeah, anyways, if somebody wants to purge those and they're just stored on Foundy, if they go into the Foundy automated data request and purge system, they can have their email and data purged from Foundy automatically, which is very nice. Yeah, I don't know. Taylor, do we have any questions now that we're coming up to the 45-minute mark?
Yeah, I think we really only had one main question, and it's in terms of kind of you spoke a little bit about how different ad platforms have these new kind of fingerprinting technologies. Can you speak a little bit about if that affects at all what type of page load times we're seeing, and then also kind of like explain a little bit about those different identifiers that connect those data points?
Yes. So page load times from our testing, from our version, it doesn't affect much. It's like a millisecond difference for collecting the data. The actual analysis happens after the collection of the data. So the type of data we're collecting is very simple kind of data for the most part. It's the kind of data that comes through your header, your browser header. So what fonts you're using, what's your IP address, what's your location, default settings, exactly which browser version it is, like a whole bunch. It's like 150 different data points. But all that stuff can be collected pretty easily the second a website loads. And so we actually do the analysis after we've collected the data. We don't do that before pages load, essentially. We just take that snapshot and then we use that later to determine if those are the same people. Sorry, Taylor, you had another question that was part of the question.
No, that was it. I was just kind of answering it live. And just for clarity, like none of that data that's pulled in the header is PII, right? It's not like it's not emails. You're not actually capturing any personal identification. It's all stuff that they don't have to worry about from a tracking perspective.
Mostly.
Yeah.
So we definitely don't capture emails. We don't capture anything like that. Don't forget, there are pixels. Foundy does have its own pixel and its own cookie. It is its own first party, as long as it's firing through our own system. But also we do use IP addresses. We have to use an IP address to determine a location, essentially. We don't store it indefinitely, though. We just store it long enough to actually use it and determine where someone's at, and then we purge it. So it doesn't store forever. And you don't actually have access to IP data through our system. It's what we use on the back end to determine. And if you go into like your advertising insights, your advertising reporting, your link insights pages, stuff like that, and you see that someone's from Durham, North Carolina, We gathered that by seeing the IP address, which passes every time a website loads, essentially. We use that with a third-party system called MaxMind. It's pretty much who everybody uses. They keep track of IP addresses related to cities that people are in, essentially. And then we just gather the data. We know that that's someone coming from Durham, and then we don't have an association to the IP address anymore after that. We don't need to hold on to it beyond that, essentially.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. Yeah, we didn't really have any other questions come up. Here's Aaron asking, though, as I say that, even if rough estimate, what percentage of conversions do you estimate are likely recovering by using the fingerprinting technologies?
Oh, that's a good question. So we're actually working on a case study right now. It shows the entire methodology, the entire approach. We've seen some campaigns where the conversion pixels have just been blocked the entire time. Either they're being blocked by plugins, by browser settings, by browsers, or even being stymied by the ticketing platform itself, unfortunately. And the fingerprinting technology takes us from 0 to seeing 116 conversions that we can accurately tie to the actual ad campaign itself. By the way, the way it really works is when the banner ad is clicked on, we take that fingerprint. When the conversion that is being reported, so let's say it's like ticketmaster.com/whatever, thankyou.html or something. Someone will set up a rule that says URL includes ticketmaster.com and thankyou.html. It's the only place that's going to exist. If the pixel, if the JavaScript is installed, which Ticketmaster does allow us to do now, if the JavaScript is installed, then when that page loads and that JavaScript triggers, we take another fingerprint and we say, wait, do these things match? And it's very, very linear, actually. So it's quite effective. It's honestly, I think, more effective than pixels and cookies have been in the last 4 years, which is pretty awesome. So a lot of percent, a lot of percent. But we'll be publishing a case study with the methodology and the numbers, hopefully in the next month or so. We have a rough draft currently, but we're still working on data collection and trying to figure that out exactly.
Yeah, follow-up question, Aaron. You asked about attribution period within Foundy, and I think you can do this within other platforms as well, but you can set your attribution window. I think our default is like 30 days, but I think you have the ability to change that to how many days. I don't think you can go much beyond that, but yeah, you can kind of set that within when you're setting up the conversion at the ad level.
Yep.
If anybody, of course, has questions on any of that stuff, feel free to reach out and we can hop on a call and kind of talk more specifically about your point of sale and how the pixel works and how to set up those conversions if you're not familiar.
Absolutely. And one other thing I was going to say for this might even be pretty relevant to conversion related questions, but a lot of you have probably used UTM URLs in the past. Google, like URL Builder, has a nice little tool for this where you can set up like campaign equals, Live Nation and, source equals Facebook ads or whatever. So UTM codes in URLs, that can be an effective way to track a click to a conversion. Unfortunately, some browsers, including Safari, and I believe maybe Facebook web client, et cetera, a few others, they're stripping out your URL parameters now as well. So they're making it more difficult and more opaque. For what reason? I think it really goes back to the original reason. They want to be the, one of the 5 gatekeepers. That should be something that anybody can use. But unfortunately, a lot of browsers and even like analytics softwares are starting to strip out UTM parameters as well, unfortunately.
Awesome. Well, I don't think we have any other questions. No, we still have a few minutes if anybody else wants to drop something in the chat, but otherwise, very much, I think I think it was well received. We're getting a couple of good comments. So, thank you both, Daniel and Jason, obviously for your time and expertise on this. Obviously, as a reminder, everybody, this is not legal advice. You should take kind of what you've learned here and go chat with your legal team or consult somebody if you have a very specific scenario. And of course, if there's anything we can do to help at the Foundy level, please don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah, anything else to add, Daniel or Jason?
Well, thank you, Daniel, for joining. To everyone on the call, I just dropped in those 2 names, the platforms that I mentioned earlier. I use Cookie Pro most often. A lot of our clients are now using Cookie Yes as well. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily an advocate for either one of them. They both have their pain points, but doesn't everything. Those are 2 if you want to start exploring options for cookie management, cookie consent tools. But yeah, really nice to have you guys.
Yep. And to answer your question, Fodring, we will be sending out a recap once this is downloaded. We'll send out a thank you email to everybody that registered and with the links to view this webinar. Sorry, Daniel, didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I was going to say apologies at the beginning for my internet issues. Jason, you provided my LinkedIn information if anyone wants to reach out or has questions about their privacy policy or their terms of service.
Yep.
To give an assessment.
Cool.
Yep.
It looks like one other question, Jason. I don't know if you have an answer to this, but any open source cookie managers that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. I feel like there should be, but yeah, not that I'm aware of. They're kind of there's so much under the hood on those things. It feels like using HubSpot or something, or GA4 almost on some level. In fact, just maybe just one last thing. Our approach managing these data ecosystems and installing the cookie consent tools and stuff like that, we have to use a combination of Cookie Pro and Google Tag Manager and GA4, and then all the other pixels and scripts and everything else that we need to load. It can become pretty difficult if you have to start to manage and treat different territories differently. So yeah, our sort of recipe though is Cookie Pro, Google Tag Manager, GA4. But yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks again, everybody, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. And thank you, Daniel, for joining us as well. And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to message us on LinkedIn or shoot us an email at Foundy. But everybody have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful week. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, everyone.